Hey, what's going on, everybody? This is Jarrell Mason. Welcome to another episode of Beyond the Album Cover, where we get inside the entertainment industry with those in the know and give them their flowers while they're here to be celebrated. With me right now, I have a man that's responsible for breaking some of the biggest records within the past 50 years from artists such as Barry White, Luther Vandross, a little artist from across the pond by the name of Sade, various others. Got to start in 1971 promoting That Nigga's Crazy by the late great Richard Pryor on Stats Records, worked at various labels in between, and now is the founder CEO of TC Thompkins LLC Marketing Company, taking his experiences from his 50 plus years in the music industry and applying it towards the digital age. And he's the author of this great book, When Radio Was King, available wherever you can get it. It's a great book. And like LeVar Burton says, you don't have to take my word for it. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's please give a round of applause to Mr. T.C. Thompkins. Mr. Thompkins, thank you for coming on Beyond the Album Cover, sir.
My pleasure, man. My pleasure.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate you taking the time out and to talk about your book and your times in the music industry, because I was fascinated with your book since I know various people within the music industry and always heard stories behind the scenes of how shady these record executives can be, especially when you're working in the black urban R&B or even rap department even.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm hoping that the industry has changed a lot since I was in charge of the black division, but there was tons of racism back in it when I was in the business back then. But like you said before we started the interview, it was much more of a wild, wild west kind of situation, especially from the 70s into the 80s. I talk about in my book that you wouldn't have recognized New York City in the late 70s, that it was just an open drug market. That's basically what it was, you know. It was just an era where, well, matter of fact, just take a list, look at what was on TV, Miami Vice. That lets you know what was going on in the streets right there.
Right. So I had
Uh,
visions of seeing New York during that time period where apartments were being burned out. Some lords were trying to collect their insurance money, the
mhm.
peepholes in Times Square. And this was at the start where hip hop got its origins.
That's very true. Very true. That's the streets of New York were pretty tough back then. Because when I first got to New York in '78, uh, like I say, it was an open drug market, man, and it was a lot of poverty. A lot of black areas had been taken over and demolished, and buildings burned out, and there was a lot of heroin. I think that was right before the crack epidemic, because I think crack came in the '80s, but I know heroin was a big narcotics in New York when I first got there in the late '70s. Matter of fact, I used to drive my kids. I think it's a story in my book where I used to drive through Harlem on my way to New Jersey, and we used to go through an area on 116th Street where it was just like an open drug flea market. Heroin addicts were in the middle of the street nodding out. Some women would be there holding their babies, while they getting a fix. It was ugly. Trust
Right.
me, it was ugly.
Man, I could definitely bet. So let's back up to the beginning. Born in Richmond, Virginia, raised in Texas. What led you to want to get into this wild industry known as the music business?
Love of music, just a straight up love of it. And I'm tell you, anybody that's interested in getting into the industry, if you don't get in for the right reason, it is a death trap. But if you get into it for the love of the music and the industry, that was my pure intent. Is that, like I say in my book, when I was in Vietnam and I left high school, I really didn't have any directions. I was intelligent young man. I thought I was. At least I was in the top 10 of my class. I always did well in school. Never really applied myself the way I think I should have. Uh, when you're young and stupid, you do a lot of stupid stuff. But I joined the army and wanted to see the world. And while I was in Vietnam, I had to make a decision. I mean, what the hell are you gonna do when you get back to the States? I definitely didn't want to re-enlist in the army. I'd had enough of Vietnam and being in the service. So I had to make a decision on what direction I want to take my life. And I just made a decision right then. not knowing nothing about the industry, because people find it hard to believe. I had no idea or no clue what the industry was about, what was it consisted of. Only thing that I knew was what I heard on the radio, was the music I heard on the radio. But I had just made up in my mind that I wanted to be in the music industry, you know.
Right. So being in
Mm-hmm.
Vietnam with the radio formats over there, I believe, like most of Europe, is very open to where you have one or two stations pretty much playing a wide swath of music,
Yeah.
regardless
Well,
of the genre.
yeah, early, back then, though, see, the only station that was available to us when we was in Vietnam was a military radio station, which was Stars and Stripes. Stars and Stripes radio was the only thing that we were privy to hear, but it played a lot of black music because there was a lot of black soldiers in Vietnam. Matter of fact, I will just tell a story. That was the first time I heard "It's a Man's World." I was in a foxhole in Vietnam when I first heard that record. So there was a lot of emphasis on the music. And it just so happened when I got back to the States, I married a young lady from Memphis, Tennessee, which was the home of Stax Records. After I got moved to Memphis, I got my first job. Matter of fact, I was in the music, I was in the jewelry business. I ran a jewelry store for Zales Jewelers. And but that wasn't, that was just a job to me. I just didn't, and I was doing my job. I was managing a store, but I didn't see it as a career. I didn't see me getting passionate about selling diamonds. So I wanted to get in the music industry, and I started working up relationship with some of the artists that was on Stax record, Eddie Floyd and Tim Prees, the Barcades. All those guys lived in this area where we lived in. Matter of fact, my house that we were staying in with my mother-in-law back then was probably about 4 blocks from Stax Records. It was right around the corner from us on Lamar. And I found my wife got a job at Stax. She was the first person that started working over there as a tape librarian. I know people won't know what I'm talking about, but back in the day when there were analog and nothing was digital, everything was recorded on a big wide 12-inch tape. Okay. And they had to keep those tapes at a certain temperature in a vault. And that was her job, was to, keep logs of all the ins and outs of the tapes and all the recording material that go in and out of the studio. And I eventually got a job at Stax in their sales department when they were trying to get into distribution.
Now, working in sales for a record label, did you have to work all over across the country, or were you assigned to a particular region to do sales?
I had a particular region. What they had done was they had purchased a couple of other distributors or one stops in other parts of the country. And they had those outlets when there was physical product. Now, these are all elements when there were physical product. None of these elements are around anymore at all, which I think is a damn shame, excuse the French, because there were a lot of blacks that owned these one stops and retailers and wholesalers, and they were in this chain from the merchant to the consumer. So black participation was high in the industry back then, but higher than it is now. Because there were Ernest One Stoppers in Chicago that was owned by blacks. Fletcher's was owned by blacks. Eddie Kendrick's, matter of fact, brother had a one stop in Detroit. Kendrick's One Stop. But I started off working 4 states, and I was selling 45s. For your listeners, that's wax, small, what they call small 7-inch wax, which singles used to come on. And the 12-inch wax was when the albums was LPs. But that's what I started off doing. That eventually went out of business. They moved me to promotions. That's when I met Richard Pryor with that project, That Nigga's Crazy. And
Right.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, so was that a tough sell trying to get that album sold? Because this was back during the time where retailers wouldn't even sell an explicit comedy record, it was only the mom and pops, and if they did
Oh
sell
yeah,
it, it would be in the back of the record store or
yeah.
behind the counter with a brown paper bag or something
Well,
to cover up the label.
as secret as it's known, as little as known, there were tons of outlets that would sell that. There were more of those type of stores that you're talking about, small mom and pop stores, than there were chains, especially in the Black community. There wasn't major retail chains in the Black community. They didn't have a Peaches or a Tower. These are the stores, or major store chains that used to be in the major metropolitan shopping areas. They used to have Tower Records, Peaches Records, Warehouse Records, Discount Records. All those record stores were owned by major chains. Most mom and pop shops or Black shops were owned by an individual or a family. And we have no problems placing that material in those stores. Okay, that's because that's the only place it's sold. Like you said, you go in a major chain, you got to go in the back, in the corner in the back to find it, where they keep what they call the red light district projects or the red light album. They'd have them in the back. They'd be right up front in a mom and pop because they know they're sold.
Yeah, they sold like hotcakes, and this was right
Oh
around the
yeah.
era where you had OK Records and Leroy and Skillet, LaWanda Page, Willie
Yeah.
Tyler and Lester, Red Fox. It was those albums you had to
There
make
you
sure the
go.
kids were in bed before you put on because you had no business
Uh-huh.
listening to it.
Absolutely. Those were the red light projects. That were all the projects. And we had little snippets that we took out of Richard's project. But I would, like I say in the book, I wasn't with Stax very long. I didn't get a chance to really work with Richard other than an introductory and going out on the road with his project. They moved me to promotions. And I started on custom labels and I started doing, that's when I started doing Richard stuff. But I left there and went to Capitol Records within the first year.
All right, so talk about that transition going from Stax to Capitol.
Well, that's really where I learned the industry. The first part of the industry was with Capitol because I really didn't have enough experience at Stax to kind of know what I was talking about. Okay, all I had when I was at Stax was I was just eager, ambitious, and wanted to learn. You know, I was willing to learn. But when I got to Capitol, I actually had material. Capitol didn't have a lot of great material in the beginning. After I was there for a while, they signed Natalie Cole because when I first got there, I think the only group that they had that was doing anything was Tavares. All the other acts that they had were never really developed. They had Tavares, then we had Natalie Cole, and then we had Mays. But before Natalie Cole and Mays, it was real slim pickings. As a matter of fact, the guys that worked for Motown in Atlantic, they used to dog me because he called me the dog catcher because all the records I had were dogs, you know. And that's what they were called it when the records wasn't a hit record. They said, "Man, you got another dog record." So I earned my stripes there because I worked my butt off. I had to. I didn't have a strong material, you know. So when you don't have strong material, man, you got to make up with it with kindness and effort. I went to see everybody that was anybody. I went to see them. I went to all the small radio stations that nobody else would visit. I went to all the retail outlets. I had relationships with almost everybody in that 4-state area before I left and went to Chicago because I worked my butt off. That's one of the reasons why I got good at it. I just worked my butt off.
Right. Now, what were the 4 states that you cornered?
In the beginning, I had Texas, Arkansas, Louisiana, and Oklahoma. Very seldom went to Oklahoma because it was only one city in Oklahoma had a station that was Tulsa. I think they got something one in Oklahoma City. Now they do. But most of my time was in Houston, where I'm at now, because Houston was the market that was breaking most of the records. Houston had a KYOK, which was the big FM down here. And like I mentioned in the book, the program director was named George Boobaloo Frazier. He was world famous. He used to carry a big 44 Magnum. He used to have it on his desk all the time. But that station was a station where everything was happening. You know, they were doing the shows. Dramatics would come into town quite often. Chaka Khan, big shows in Houston, and they were busting records. this was the market for breaking new acts.
Right. Now, did you come across spending some time in the offices of various people at KCOH down in
Oh
Houston?
yeah, oh yeah. I used to stay. I used to know Travis Gardner. That was the KCOH. Paris Ely, matter of fact, that was end up being my boss later on at CBS. First met him at KCOH. He was a DJ. I was down there working him. I worked KCOH every time I was in the city, but KCOH really back then didn't have no punch. You know, it does sell. Now I say that for it does sell music. It used to sell music, but it was the signal wasn't really strong enough to make a real impact.
Right. And this is
Mhm.
back during the days when AM radio was king. And if
Yeah.
you had a whole bunch of power at a certain time at night, you had to
Oh
reduce
yeah.
the power down so that you wouldn't have clear channel interference.
No, yeah, you could go across the world. I mean, I used to listen to Chicago and New York in my house in East Texas. That's where the only place we could really get good music was late at night. Like you said, they used to have an all night music show used to come on, and I think it was WLS in Chicago, and they used to be have play all the black music late at night, and you could order the music from the radio station. That's how I first started ordering music. That's what everybody used to do because there wasn't any black stations in certain areas of the country. You know, it was only black station I think was back then was in Memphis.
And that was, I believe,
WDIA.
WDIA, which I believe BB King got it
Uh-huh.
started there. The
Absolutely.
late Rufus Thomas got it started there, and
Yeah.
definitely played a monumental role with exposing
Black
black
music.
music to a wider audience, along with WHBQ in Memphis.
Yeah, yeah. DIA is still like you can hear DIA down to the Gulf Coast. It's a 50,000 watt AM. Bobby OJ, good friend of mine, programmed that station for years and had the morning show over there. I spent a great deal of time in Memphis. My daughters were born in Memphis. So Memphis is like home, you know. It isn't the city that it used to be. I hate that because I used to love Memphis, man. When they pulled out all the industry and all the manufacturing in Memphis, the crime became a big problem in the city. But back in the 60s and 70s, man, Memphis was humming. Stacks was open. You know, there was people were working. There were tons of industry in the city. So, you know, and it was such a clean city. I used to really like it.
Yeah, I had a chance to visit Memphis a couple of years ago, my wife and and I
Mhm.
told her, I don't care where we go in Memphis, I got to go to the Stax Museum. I got
Oh
to
yeah,
go. So I got to see all of the archival footage, Isaac Hayes'
absolutely.
vehicles, the old reel-to-reel machines, and we made a pit stop to Reverend Al Green's church. Now,
Oh yeah,
on the rare Sunday, he was there, and I
I
was
can't
trying my
believe that you
hardest.
caught him there.
Yeah, I was trying my hardest not to fanboy during the service. I had enough
Uh,
decency in me to not take no pictures inside the church because I'm there to worship, not to say, hey, can you do? I'm so tired of being alone while preaching. But his voice still sounds like the
oh yeah, now
record.
Al still got it, man. Al still got it. I mean, he was an institution in Memphis when we were up there when I lived in Memphis.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
So let's
Al
talk.
Strong.
Yeah, definitely a legend. So let's talk about
Mhm.
the first time you heard She's Gone by Tavares, and then your thoughts when the Apple got a chance to get bitten twice with that song when Hall and Oates covered it.
Yeah, well, I mean, both of them I thought were great songs. I didn't particularly love them. Matter of fact, I heard She's Gone just the other day. It's on my playlist. Uh, She's Gone is a pop record. Okay, and the way it was cut was pop with Tavares, and the way it was cut was pop with Hall and Oates. I'll be truthful with you. I mean, I love both renditions. I know the guy. I know Tavares, so you know I'm partial to them. I know those guys. I work with. Matter of fact, there's a picture of me with them and Boogaloo in the book. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. They used to do club dates down there. They were hot at.
Yeah, definitely white hot. And this is also coming off of Saturday Night Fever, and everybody's still
Mm-hmm.
trying to cash in on the last bit of disco. Now, we were talking prior to when the interview started that at the end of March, the Spinning Gold movie will be coming out about Casablanca Records and how that
Mm-hmm.
record label launched superstars, Kiss, Donna Summer, list goes on and on. But Neil Bogart got to start working at Buddha Records with
Yeah,
the Ozzy Brothers and the Ohio Express, Yummy, Yummy, Yummy. I got love in my
Casablanca.
tummy. So let's talk about Casablanca Records and how the
Well,
industry really
I didn't
cashed
really
in.
know much about Casablanca other than people that I knew that worked there.
Uh-huh.
I had no dealings with them. I know that they were live. I know that Casablanca was wild. Uh, they they took no prisoners, so that's how they did what they did. I never really worked with Casablanca. I've only known two people that were there. No, three. Gerald Busby was there for a while. I know Gerald. Uh, Maurice Warfield was there, and another friend of mine, Jesus, was there. So I really didn't have too much dealings with Casablanca.
Right. Let's talk about Mr. Gerald Busby, because for me, I know Gerald Busby from his tenure over at MCA, and when he later went over to Motown, and he was the guy that was responsible for having New Edition, the Jets, Jody Watley, and later Bobby Brown got signed in. He went over to Motown, and of course had Boys to Men, Today, The Good Girls, The Boys. So let's talk about the late great Mr. Gerald Busby.
Well, I knew Gerald when I first got to CBS. He was working for CBS. He was there for a moment, I think, before he went to Casablanca. I worked with him when he was at Motown because we had Guy at MCA, and we had Rex and Effect at Motown. So I knew him, on all levels. He was a great guy, good person, good record man. That's really basically all I could say about him. I didn't really know him personally that well, other than just business.
Right.
Okay, but I know he was a great guy. I never had no problems with Gerald. He supported the projects that I was working with. Like I say, he gave Gene that deal at MCA with Guy. But Al Teller is really one's responsible for Guy and Teddy Riley and them happening. Gerald had left and went to Motown when Guy and Teddy Riley and them happened.
Wow, that is definitely a crazy story. We're gonna get into Gene Griffin and Guy a little bit later, but after you went to Capitol, I believe you went to ABC Records, right?
Yeah, worked at ABC for about 2 years.
Okay. Now, what was the difference as far as going from Capitol to ABC in terms of promotions, and did the strategies for promotions change based on which market you were going to promote?
Well, I was over the same markets, but it was Capitol and ABC was night and day. Capitol was very structured. ABC was not structured at all. ABC had a great roster. They had Chaka Khan, they had Rufus and Chaka Khan, Dramatics, Four Tops, Crusaders, Pointer Sisters, Steely Dan. We had tons of stuff at ABC, and ABC was run by a black president. That's the only time I've ever worked for any label other than Stax that the president was black, and that was at ABC Records. Otis Smith ran ABC Records when I was there. He was big. Matter of fact, he's the same guy behind Anita Baker. He's the one that signed Anita Baker to her deal. So I was over there with a couple of years. I loved working at ABC because it was wide open, it was loose. You ran your own operations. We didn't have any kind of branch structure or any kind of managerial structure. So staff was basically all satellite personnel. So my house served as my warehouse, my office, my everything. So then we had BB King and Bobby Bland. I forgot about that because we had that BB King and Bobby Bland project live with BB King and Bobby Bland. It sold it. That record was just on fire. And that was a double album, which was very rare that you get a double album. Only other person I know done it is James Brown. If you do a double live album and it sells, that's very rare.
Yeah, so what was that transition going from ABC and when you hit Chicago for the first time, and what was that first Chicago winter like?
Well, I hated Chicago winters. It was brutal. We had 88 inches of snow the first year I was up there. It was just unbelievable, man. You couldn't even see around it. You had to pull up to the stoplights and peep around the snow to see if there's any incoming traffic. But I loved Chicago other than the weather, man. Chicago was a beautiful city back then. There wasn't no all that killing. It wasn't no man. I used to stay on the south side, go to all the clubs. I never even heard a shot. I stayed in Chicago 3 years, I believe it was. I never heard a gun fired. I now one thing Chicago I remember Chicago for was the women would fight in a heartbeat. I seen women fight in clubs all the time, but it was just a good market. I met Minnie Rippleton when I was in Chicago for the first time. Met Herbie Hancock, Bill Withers, George Duke, Tyrone Davis, Johnny Taylor. All these artists I met while I was working in Chicago. And Denise Williams, Gladys Knight Pips. I mean, man, it was just endless, and CBS and Columbia, because I worked for both Columbia and Epic back then as a local for Chicago. So I worked all of their products, Teddy Pendergrass, OJ's, Eisner Brothers. So I just had a great time in the market, had 3 real strong black radio stations. E. Rodney Jones, the legendary E. Rodney Jones was at BON. And it had Ernest James, which was the great program director for BMX. So it was a very rich market as far as black participation. They had 3 black one-stops, Ernie's one-stop. They had Fletcher's. They had another black one-stop. I can't think of the name of it. But it was a lucrative time. People were making money. The market was real rich with excitement, So I enjoyed that whole time I was there. Only thing I hated about Chicago was the weather. The weather was just brutal.
Yeah,
But
I would bet. I would bet
yeah.
that little Pico jacket wasn't gonna cut it in Chicago.
No. And the funny thing about it, man, I had always lived down south. Chicago was the first time I've ever lived up in the Midwest of North, and my wardrobe was not ready at all. I had to go buy a whole brand new set of clothes when I got up there. Cause man, winters up that dog don't play. Matter of fact, it was so bad I had never seen this. They have ropes tied to the buildings, so when you down on Lakeshore Drive, that you can grab the rope so the wind don't knock you over. And the wind's like a razor, man. When it's 20 or 30 below and shit, you got to put something over your face, your whole body.
Yep, that's why I said I'll never live in the Midwest or the Northeast, because my body's not built for that cold. So you mentioned WVON. For those of you that don't know, WVON stands for Voice of the Negro. And it was the station where Herb Kent, the cool gent, got his start. And also a little man that you may know by the name of Mr. Don Cornelius. Yes, because originally Soul Train was a local show out of Chicago. And then when he said, I need to go somewhere else to get more acts, so he moved the show to LA. They still had the local version hosted by a local host, but that was where the origins of Soul Train started.
Absolutely. I see you know your history. You know your history, man. That station was a very key in the black community. VON was, and it was run like the Empire, like I said, by world famous E. Rodney Jones back then, because Al Perkins was in Detroit. E. Rodney Jones was in Chicago. And we had Frankie Crocker in New York.
Yep, Mr. Frankie Crocker, the chief rocker, the man responsible for WBLS in a class by itself.
The man. He was the man in New York, no question. The guy that gave him the blues up there, though, was Barry Mayo. Barry Mayo came out of Chicago. Barry Mayo took over WGCI when FM was really first starting. GCI, I believe, was the first FM station that I could go. No, it was the second FM station that I worked with. And Barry Mayo took over GCI and then went over from there. After he made GCI #1, went to KISS in New York. And he gave Frankie the blues. With a little help from me.
Definitely that, because I've always heard stories that Frankie Crocker was a particular fellow, especially he was very full of himself and rubbed people the wrong way, and really wasn't the type of guy you could be buddy with.
No, No, we did not hit it off at all. I tried to, to be well, I probably had the wrong attitude because Frankie felt like he was special. I didn't feel like he was special. I understood that he was in the largest market in the world, in the city, in the country, really. But he wasn't big enough to stop a #1 record. I've had #1, #2 records without having Chicago or New York. Okay, if you have something strong enough and you believe in it, you know what? I was the type of individual. I'm still like this. If I feel like my material is genuine, and I feel like I have a genuine piece of art here, this is the genuine work of art, I'm not going to kiss anybody's behind or do anything special for you to consider something that deserves to be recognized for just what it is. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. And was it around this time where labels were starting to use indie promoters to go to stations and promote records? Or was it when you still had people in the promo department going to the labels to try to get the PD to say, hey, play this record? And it was almost kind of like anything goes where you had to pay to play. And sometimes you had to get more than just money.
Indies have always been an element in the music business. There's not been a time when it hasn't. From the beginning, from the concept of the music business and making 45, there's always been payoff, and you're not gonna ever get rid of it. I have a friend of mine tell me that when I first got in the industry, and I was a little young whippersnapper, and I was talking about DJs taking money and illicit money being involved. Illicit money is involved in everything in America. Let's just understand that right away. Illicit money is involved in your government, in your police department, in your juries, in your justice system. I mean, this is America. America worships crooks. I mean, how can somebody like Al Capone be a hero? In America, he's a hero. And so don't even get me started on that, because I go in
Oh
another
no! Oh
direction.
no! Oh no! No!
Yeah,
No! It's your
but
time. It's your
I don't
time.
feel. You know what? Look, somebody else asked me about that other day about payroll and blah blah blah. And man, I don't have any problem with it because it started because black jocks was not making the kind of money they should be making. Man, I know when I was going to radio back in the day, man, they weren't paying them guys but maybe $125 a week, $200 a week, something like that. The station making millions, So the pay scale has never been right with radio. Okay, some of the big time, chains now, like Clear Channel, iHeart, Series. Let me see, what is it? Cumulus, Salem. That's another subject too, because since major corporations have gotten involved with music, with radio, radio has really kind of lost its interest in music.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that.
Yeah, it's kind of lost its interest in music. Radio kind of uses music now like an advertising arm. It's not like a musical journey anymore. Okay, radio produces a sound that is conducive to you. They don't want to change the sound to where you may change the channel. So it has, since there are so many other means of getting music nowadays, radio just feels like it doesn't have to consider itself the person that you go to for your music.
Right, because I definitely remember for me, I came at the tail end where radio was still that important medium to where you had your tape deck on the ready to record your song off the radio, and you had to wait to maybe the next hour until that song got played, where how you mentioned now, due to streaming and all the other outlets, radio doesn't have that same effect. And
no, they don't.
I believe when Napster started to come into the industry,
that's when
a lot of the execs didn't really see the change coming, and what we're
Mm-hmm.
seeing now with the movie industry, they're going through what the music industry went through with
The
streaming.
same
Everybody
thing.
saying like, "Hey,
Absolutely.
I'm not going to
Yeah.
go to a high price theater. Why go pay this high price money for a ticket and
When I
refreshments
can sit in
when
my
I can sit at
living
home?"
room, make my popcorn. Yeah. I mean, man, I can't remember. I think the last time I went to a movie, I took my grandson to see Black Out, which was a waste of money. Sorry movie.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
I definitely agree. So do you
Uh-huh.
think a lot of the people in the industry are very risk averse and not really open to change because they're so seeing tunnel vision with all the money that's rolling in, that when something that seismic happens, they're not able
Mm.
to prepare themselves for the shift?
Well, what is happening in the industry now? It's going through another change right now. Your listeners and viewers will realize soon your choices in new music are going to get slimmer and slimmer, other than through independent artists. If you'll notice, major record labels are not releasing as many releases as they used to. This, I do indie for a lot of labels and a lot of artists. I'm usually working at least 5 or 6 projects by now. I think I'm working one. Okay. They have just, with the money that streaming is making for major labels, they don't need to risk their money on a new artist. You have to realize they're selling catalog that was paid for 40 years ago. Because what I listen to is not what you listen to. You're listening to a different generation of music. But since it is so available and so immediately available, people in my age range don't have to listen to radio anymore to hear our style of music. We just turn on Spotify or Apple and play whatever we want to play. I play Teddy Pendergrass, Luther Vandross, Sade. I play stuff I want to hear. So I very seldom listen to the radio.
Right. And with the recent news we've been seeing with legacy artists selling their catalogs, and now De La Soul just got their entire catalog put on streaming after years of fighting with Tommy Boy, we're starting to
Yep.
see a change in the revolution and how artists are now saying, "Hey, we know more now. You can't just
Mm-hmm.
hide behind the wall now. We want to take control of every aspect of the business and not just sign away anything and you give us that paper bag with the money."
What is going to end up happening is publishing is everything. Okay. Publishing for the long haul, not for the day, but for the long haul is everything. That's why labels are buying up all these publishing. They bought up Bruce Springsteen's. I paid $500,000,000 for 50% of Michael Jackson's catalog.
Right. And
Man,
publishing is key. And if you know how to write, and that's the one thing Michael Jackson, the king of pop himself, he was very astute of
very
the
astute.
business.
I say that. Yeah.
Don't let the glove fool you. Don't
No,
let
don't
the
let
high
the
pitched voice
gloves.
fool you. He from Gary,
No.
Indiana.
Yeah, I say that in the book. Don't let that moonwalk fool you. Michael was as sharp as a tack man. Michael knew the industry. He knew the racism in it. I mean, he was not an ignorant person by any means. Don't let you think he was a different person than when he wasn't on stage.
Right. So
Okay.
once Thriller became a big pop hit, and Off the Wall, while it was an R&B album hit, my favorite album, by the way, I like that over Thriller.
Mm-hmm.
Michael, I think once he saw that Off the Wall wasn't getting the recognition he felt it deserved from pop, Thriller was a mainstay to say, "Hey, I'm gonna go pop no
Yeah.
matter what." So how do you
Well,
handle
the label wanted that too, because I mean, I feel like you did. Off the Wall is just as good or better than Thriller. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing is that it took that much of him and him generating up to that, because what people have to realize, even though the Jacksons and Michael Newton was huge, Michael has not had a track record of solo releases other than being. Okay. He didn't have all the other stuff he did. Got to Be all the big records he had. It was a
Mm-hmm.
Jackson. He may have been the lead, but it was the Jacksons, and it was done under the Jacksons banner. He's never been the headline act, other than he was the headline act. But you understand, in the billing, it's never been Michael Jackson and the Jacksons. Think about it.
Mm-hmm.
All their projects were the Jacksons.
Right.
It was never Chaka Khan and Rufus. It was none of that until Off the Wall.
Right.
The only other project he had with Michael Jackson was Being.
Mm-hmm. So how does the promotional strategy change when you have an album that you can work for multiple formats?
Well, I had a lot to do with that because we had a lot of big fights about those two projects because they were important. I didn't like the fact that they put Paul McCartney on the first single on Thriller. I hated that. The Girl Is Mad. I thought that was a piece of shit. But it was done for political reasons. Okay. Paul McCartney, you can't get no stronger pop radio than Paul McCartney. Okay. So that was the introduce Michael to pop radio.
Mm-hmm.
in a real way from the first release. And then that video on Billie Jean, there wasn't nothing you could do behind that, man. That was a masterpiece.
Yes, definitely a master class. And there's a story in Hitman about Mr. Walter Yetnikoff called MTV and said, I'm going to pull every last video from the library unless you play him. Because Rick James was talking about it, how MTV wasn't playing black artists.
They're racist as they could be, man. I mean, look, this is America. You'll see in my book, racism is everywhere. If you black in America, it is a fact. It ain't nothing that you think you may experience or you saw and so. You're going to experience it. I mean, it's just a fact. And what I always, because people ask me that, well, how did you handle that? I've treated racism as a fact, but it never really changed the way I handled anything. I acted as if I was a grown ass man at all times. Now, if somebody has to call me on it, then we'll deal with it then, Right. But up until then, until you put that N word in somebody's mouth, we're going to deal with it like we're both two adult human beings, not a black man, not a white man, and we're trying to accomplish something together. And that's the way you have to look at it. And you can't go at it humbly. I mean, trust me, I know, Now, one of the reasons if you buy my book, you find out is one of the reasons why I'm probably not at a major label is because I was always felt that I did not have to take a second seat to anyone, and I felt like what I was doing was noteworthy. And I bring out the point in the book, even though Epic had never been a black label. See, people don't think about that. Epic had never been a black label until Larkin Hall came over and started signing black acts to Epic, because the only black artists that they had were on custom labels. They weren't on Epic. On Philly International and Taboo and all the other Teddy Pendergrass, OJ's, Phyllis High, all those people, Philly International, Gene Kahn, so Epic. Columbia is the one had the powerhouse. Columbia had Johnny Taylor, Earth, Wind and Fire, Denise Williams, Bill Withers, Minnie Riperton. I mean, they had everybody. So we didn't build into a black label until I got there.
Right.
I came there in 78. I think Larkin came in 78. Wow. We both came there in 78.
Wow. So what was that like, building a black roster from the ground up when their profile doesn't really give the cachet that this is where black art is accepted?
What happened and what really helped me in my quest to do that was Frank DeLeo. Walter Yetnikoff brought Frank DeLeo in to take over Epic Promotions. Frank DeLeo chose me as his national for Epic Records. And basically, after we did some house cleaning, he gave me run of the stadium. I could do whatever. as long as I was breaking records, you know, this his only concern was that I didn't do anything illegal and break records, and that was it. And they kind of loosened me up to do what I had to do, make the investments. I did I advertised for all the black trade outlets that I got heat from all the time. I supported all our black artists with tours. You know, I put out, actually, we were trying to develop, I put on tours. You know, it wasn't none of that, we can't afford it or nothing like that. I put them on the road, let them meet and, you know, do the meet and greets, do the press party. Same thing I did with Sade. I put Sade on the road. I had major press parties with her throughout the country and introduced her to all what you would call influencers back then, you know, like people like Calvin Klein, people like that. Our press department was very helpful in that. But I just demanded that we get the, I never did though, even though I demanded that we get the attention that we supposed to get, even though we ended up being the #1 black label in the world. I never even had a national. I never had a national director of promotions the entire time that I was at Epic. Now that's unheard of.
Wow. Now with Sade, with her coming over from the UK, with the marketing strategy coming from Europe to the US and how US radio was more segregated, you had to pretty much tailor it specifically to the US urban market, because if you do your research, people, over in Europe, you only had at the time your outlets such
BBC.
as BBC One, Capital FM. It was the UK's equivalent to Top 40, and black music only got heard on pirate radio like Kiss FM before they became legal. And so you really had to dig and search. But once Sade came into the US with the Diamond Life album, that opened the door for all those later acts from across the pond, like 52nd Street, Loose Ends, Five Star, Soul to Soul, Brand New Heavies, and pretty much said, hey, it's okay to bring your sound over here because there's an audience and market for it.
Yeah. Yeah, that was I had to explain that situation to Sade because she didn't know. She was being played pop, what we would consider pop in Europe. She was a pop artist. Matter of fact, she's still a pop. I just did an interview with London Radio, Smooth Radio, which is the black equivalent, the black radio station in London. I never even realized that they did not have a real black radio station in London until the 90s. I mean, like you said before then, it was all pirate radio. You'd have to, they were broadcasting from ships and stuff, you know. But yeah, they do not play Sade on black radio. She's a pop artist, and that's what she was. That's what she was really concerned about coming to America, was that she did not want to become another R&B female artist. You know, she didn't want to become a Chaka Khan, but she thought it was a great artist and had not been given the exposure that she should have received. So I tried to explain to her, and I finally convinced her that the only way that we were going to do what she wanted done with her material was to go through black radio. It was just no other way around it. Pop radio was not going to play her out of the box in America. You know, even though she had sold, I think back then, 2 to 3 million in Europe. She was big in Europe. But there was no way that they were going to be playing Smooth Operator and Diamond Life out of Your Love Is King out of the box on pop radio. So it just wasn't going to happen. And I explained that to her, and I finally worked it out to where she understood what I was talking about.
And she exploded like gangbusters because, like we mentioned, over in Europe, you were pretty much getting played on BBC One, Capital FM, and if you got on Top of the Pops, you were pretty much a star all over Europe, because that was considered their equivalent of American Bandstand. And Dixie Peach, he was the first black presenter for Top of the Pops, and how when a lot of American acts would go over to the UK to do a press, Top of the Pops was the main stop. And if you look at the Saturday Love video, I believe that was their Top of the Pop performance with Alexander O'Neal and Sherelle, I believe.
Yeah, you know what? I was just going to mention that. That's what I was going to tell you. Alexander O'Neal is on fire in Europe. they love him over there. I just talked to him about 2 or 3 months ago. Him and another actor I worked with, Candace Woodson, had a big R&B record over there. And matter of fact, she introduced me to Angie Graves, which is the big Tom Joyner in the UK. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was amazed that Alexander O'Neal is. I mean, I mentioned that I worked with Alexander O'Neal on his first stuff with Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis. Oh, that impressed the shit out of them because Alexander O'Neal is the man over there.
Yes, he is. And speaking of Alexander O'Neal and Taboo, let's talk about Mr. Clarence Avant.
The man. As a matter of fact, I got to call him. I want to see that he get his book. I sent him a book. I sent it to his daughter because he's staying with his daughters now. His daughter and his son take care of him because, I think Clarence is 91, 92, something like that. But the thing about it, I love Clarence. Clarence has been very influential in my career. I probably would still be working for a major if I had listened to him, but he'll tell you today that I'm just a hard-headed person, that I'm going to do what I feel like I need to do. And I'm going to do it the way I want to do it. And I've just been like that, even though he warned me about a lot of things that I did. And my answer would always be, fuck them. I mean, if they can't take a joke, fuck them. But he is, matter of fact, I spoke to him 2 days before his wife was killed. Mm-hmm. I spoke to his wife. She answered the phone. Beautiful woman, man. I mean, just a beautiful spirit. Just how some people brighten your mood and mm-hmm. always got something nice to say about you and how you doing. She was always witty and kind. Now me and Clarence used to F with each other all the time. We talk about each other. I call him out his name. He called me out his name. But we were really close like that. I used to love to mess with Clarence, man. I miss him, because his memory is kind of going. But he's just a great individual and a giving person, man. Something he told me one time I never will forget. Because I was always messed with him. That he got other people good jobs. You would be surprised how many black men are working because of Clarence Avant. Okay, that he made the right call and that kind of stuff. And I used to mess with him because he gave one of my enemies a job. Right. So he told me, he said, man, he called here crying. I had to do something for him. I said, well, I ain't gonna cry for your ass, so you can forget that. But what was I finna say? Oh, I said, I was just asking him about his money. I said, man, I know you got some money. Give me some money, Clarence. He said, man, one thing that has saved me, the one thing that I got plenty of, and he said, that's friends. He said, I got good friends. And I mean, I can't tell you some of the stuff that his friends have done for him that he has told me about. I don't want to put his business in the street, but he got the right kind of friends. He got friends that own like Warner Brothers and AOL and Time Warner. And I mean, he got friends that sit on money. They don't count it. They weigh it. So yeah.
They don't call him the Black Godfather for nothing.
No, they don't call him Black Godfather for nothing, dog. I mean, if he wants something to happen, he can make it happen even today. He just, I remember I was trying to get a deal for somebody with Sony. He called, he said, oh, you want to talk to Big John. This John Smith runs Sony Music, Sony Publishing. Oh, okay, get Big John. Big John like his son, and he's just a good person. I'm just blessed to have known him.
Yep, check out the Netflix documentary, The Black Godfather, if you don't know who Mr. Clarence Avant is. And it's from Climax, North Carolina.
He sure is. Absolutely.
Yes, sir.
All the brilliant people, country boys, man. They used to, let me tell you something. When I first got to New York City, they used to talk about me because I smiled all the time. This is a true story. My secretary and 2 or 3 other females were said, TC, you got to stop doing it. People see you walking down the street, they think you a mark. You think you're a mark because you smile. And I said, I'm not gonna stop smiling because of these thugs. I mean, I ain't thinking about that shit. But that's what they think, that you are too, guess attitude's too good. You know, you're supposed to be mad. You
Yeah,
know, I don't know why.
yeah, they take you as wide open as all outside. But me being from the country myself, I get that a lot, and that they take your kindness as being a
Oh
sucker.
yeah, absolutely. They take your kindness for weakness. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
how hard is that to kind of keep that mindset about you in the industry where you can't be a sheep in a den full of wolves?
Well, I mean, I'm not gonna lie, it hardened me. Uh, New York hardened me more than Chicago did. Chicago, I really liked it. You know, the guys in Chicago were dirty too, you know, but it was a different kind of dirty. New York, man, they play hardball, you know. So I wasn't really prepared for some of the vindictive hate that I got when I got there. And you got to realize, man, I mean, everybody say they admire me and admire the things that I have accomplished, but you got to realize. Matter of fact, I was doing an interview the other day with a good friend of mine, Stan Brinson, program director down in Jackson, Mississippi, and he was just telling me. He said, "Man, when I met you, he said you were like an idol. You know, he said you had Michael Jackson, Sade, and Luther Vandross, and Teddy Pendergrass." And I said, "Yeah, you know what? That same thing that made you idolize me made a lot of people hate me. You know, I say you read in the book. People mad because I had Michael Jackson. The Bulls had Michael Jordan. I mean, what do you want me to do?
You can't compete with that.
No. I mean, what can I, you know, and I mean, I understand it. I understand the hate, you know. But see, I said this, I was a very more cruel and hardened person when I lived in New York. I'm a much better person now. But the competition was ugly, so I was ugly, you know, and I try to tell everybody it wasn't like it wasn't any competition out there. You know, you got to remember Whitney Houston was out there, Prince was out there, you know. I mean, they had ton of hot acts out there. It was a good, rich environment for music, man, which I love, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But I love being number one more.
Right. So I'm sure you were looking at those industry trades like, we got these many number ones. MCA got these many. Arista got these many. I'm going to beat Clive. I'm going to beat Sylvia Rome. I'm going to beat John McClain. I'm going to beat Ed X. Stein. I'm going to beat assert whatever music industry is.
Well, you know what, though, man? You know what? I never really looked at it like that because I never really even considered. I'll be real straight up with you. I never considered. Sylvia Rome was a secretary when I was VP. Okay. She worked for Atlantic Records. I mean, I know Sylvia real well, great person. Okay. But I didn't consider what any other label was doing. That didn't even come into my mindset. The only label that I felt that was out there was my label. And that's the truth. That's the truth. I only felt that I had a label. You know, that was the only label that I was concerned about. Whatever else somebody else was doing would have to take my crumbs of what I left because I was gonna get mine. Okay, and I still got that same attitude. If I believe in a project, you got to have that kind of attitude, dog. If you're gonna break all the competition and beat all the other people, all the other tricks that they're gonna pull in, you got to go out that door understanding that I don't give a, excuse my French, fuck what they do. I'm gonna get mine. I'm gonna make this record. Matter of fact, Sade, perfect example. Nobody could hear that record, man. I wish I had recorded the stuff that people used to say about how horrible she sings, that she's off key, that the record ain't in the same groove. That's not R&B. She's not black enough. You know, I done heard it all. Okay, but I knew that record, Hang On To Your Love, had the same bottom track as Thriller. If you go back and listen to Thriller and listen to Hang On To Your Love, it's the same rhythmic pattern. And I knew if I could get Thriller, I can get this. Plus, she better looking than Michael. Okay, so And I told my staff, I didn't want to hear it. I want a top 10 record out of this single.
Right.
I don't care what you got to do. I want a top 10 single. And we got it.
Right. And you mentioned the book, The Late Tina Marie, and we just lost Bobby Caldwell. And this kind of brought mind to me of the time when you were trying to have a white artist go R&B, where you didn't necessarily put the face on the album. You would let the touring or let the press appearance do the talking for you, because you want to build that R&B base first, then go pop. And that same strategy was applied with New Kids on the Block, because I believe that was when Larkin Arnold was over at Columbia CBS. Him and Cecil Holmes and Maurice Starr had signed New Kids to the Black division.
MCA, yeah.
Because I remember they had a video for Please Don't Go Girl on BET, and how when Pop came in, they reshot the video because MTV and Nickelodeon all came knocking. So let's talk about that strategy of how, because I remember back in the day, they used to do two separate versions of the same song videos, one for the urban outlets and one for the pop outlets.
We never had to do that on my. Matter of fact, we never had to do that for any act. We never had to produce two separate videos for different formats. We had naturals on all of ours. We let the music do that. We never had to do two videos. So I mean, we never had to use that strategy. I never use that strategy at
And that just goes.
And we've been talking an hour. So I'm gonna have to go in a minute. Okay.
All right. So let's go ahead and let's jump and talk about Gene Griffin and Teddy Riley.
Well, Gene was a drug dealer. I say that in the book. He was a heroin dealer, one of the big ones in New York, trying to do. But you know, that thing wasn't big back then, because every drug dealer was trying to get in the music business back in the late 70s and 80s. That's how Jay-Z got in. That's how a whole bunch of artists started. Cash Money, Rockefeller, all of them labels just started with drug money. So there wasn't nothing odd about that. It's just that a lot of majors didn't want to deal with it, because Gene had a kind of a beat up person kind of guy. He had beat some people up. I've seen him beat some people up. He wasn't nobody to play with. Gene befriended me back when I was at CBS. I signed Teddy. He brought me a cassette on a group called Kids at Work, which was Teddy Riley. I signed Kids at Work to CBS. They dropped him like stupid people that they are. And Busby gave him a deal at MCA. The only problem was that after Busby gave him the deal at MCA, Busby left MCA and went to Motown. So Gene couldn't get to first base with MCA. Al Teller, which was the new president of MCA, was the old president of Columbia. So I knew Al Teller real well. So Gene called me and told me he was having problems. He couldn't get nobody to talk to him. MCA really wanted to drop him. Okay. Teller knew what Gene was, and he didn't want nothing to do with it. But I flew out to Los Angeles and met with Teller, told him I was taking over the label, got all the support that MCA could give us. Next thing was Teddy was $2.5 million. I think that album went 2.5 to 3 million before I left there. We did Rex and Effect. We did Redhead Kingpin with Virgin. We did Today with Big Bub, my boy. And we had a good run, man. We had a real good run. We had about 2.5 years, 3 years until Gene started stealing the money. You know what Gene do?
Yeah, and in that era of music, for me, my favorite, New Jack Swing. I tell people Big Bub sound like a more souped up hip hop oriented version of Luther. And let's talk about Luther.
Yeah, oh, I love Luther, man. Luther was an ideal act. Luther used to be on Atlantic. Atlantic dropped him like stupid. Larkin signed him. And people like, matter of fact, I had somebody ask me, how could you see Luther, Big Fat Luther, as a soul singer? I said, man, that's the way Luther sing. I didn't care if Luther weighed 600 pounds, man. You can't duplicate that vocal, and you can't duplicate his emotional thing he puts into it. Nobody could have done Superstar, none of them records but Luther. Luther was the only thing. I just hate that Luther killed himself with a diet and staying away from all that fried food, because he used to stop and eat Kentucky Fried Chicken when we was on press stool, you know. But Luther had something about him that most artists don't have. Even though he had a wealth of talent, he worked his butt off, and that's what a lot of acts nowadays are missing. I've had big records on radio for artists, man. They want to stay at home and call their performances in. You can't do that. You got to get out there and beat the streets. Luther did that. Luther didn't mind doing whatever he had to do. Get up 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. If I had to have it there, have it now. No questions. Get up and do it, man. He'd be on it. I loved working with him. He did get to be a little prima donna before it was over, because I had to go curse him out a few times. But other than that, I loved him, because even after I left Epic, man, I talked to Luther. I'll say this about 3 acts that had class. Michael Jackson. I kept my relationship with Michael after Epic. He called me frequently. We talked. He even tried to loan me money. Michael was a genuine person. Sade, genuine person. Matter of fact, gave me money to start my private company after I left CBS. And Luther. Luther kept in touch with me the whole time. Sent me tickets to Vegas to go out and see him when he was in Vegas. You know, he was just a good person.
Definitely a good grad. One of the greats he'll be missed. Current projects.
Right now, I'm not working anything but this book. Okay, I have stopped everything to make this book when radio is king. People gonna be surprised when they read this book of how wild my life was. Okay, it's like the office part in CBS. I was a monster promotion man. Still is. I'm very dedicated to what I do. Matter of fact, I'm meeting with an act I'm really hoping to get next week. A new female that I think is a monster. But I dealt with 2 or 3 drug dealers. Matter of fact, I got in trouble with the IRS from working with drug dealers. That was big back in the day. I had a lot of great memories with Frank DeLeo, real good guy. And I had a great time with Epic and Gene. You know, I say in the book, even though Gene fucked me out of my money, you know, he brought me back. He made me come back to the music industry, because I had left and had started working in TV advertising. And Gene convinced me to come back and run GR Productions for him. And I love that juice from having a hit record. You know, like I say in the book, Teddy was so hot, man. We have 5 or 6 records on the chart at one time.
Right, ain't nothing like it, and you can find it in this book, When Radio Was King, available wherever you get your books. Any shout outs you want to give? How can people find more information about you in the book?
Hey man, the book is also available at whenradiowasking.net. It's in Amazon and all the ebook spots, Barnes and Nobles, everywhere. I will have an audio book out in a few weeks. But this book took a lot of time and effort, more time and effort than I thought it would be, because I thought it would just be writing down memories and putting it together and all that kind of stuff. But you'd be surprised how much stuff I had to edit out. People don't want things talked about. There's a couple of stories in there that I do disguise because of people's families asked me to, and the artists themselves asked me to. So I think it's a good read. You will be intrigued how I got my country behind to New York City. And I thank you for putting me on, man. I appreciate anything that anybody does as far as this project is concerned. I'm available for any more interviews and phone calls. I'm doing a ton of radio stations to know that. So Thank you, man, for having me. I appreciate your time.
No problem. You can catch this interview wherever you stream and on YouTube at youtube.com/Beyond the Album Cover. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a big thank you for Mr. T.C. Thompkins. Mr. Thompkins, thank you for coming on Beyond the
Thank you,
Album Cover,
man.
sir. Yes, sir.